And what's your gut on where the Supreme Court, and maybe not on this particular technical issue, but on kind of all of these cases that are trying to say you can't fire people, you can't do this, you can't do that. Where do you think the Supreme Court is going to fall in terms
Well,
of?
he's made the issue much bigger
Yeah,
than the firing of this or that official.
yeah,
He's also issued an executive order bringing all of the so-called independent
yeah.
agencies under direct control of the executive branch, which they happen to be a part of.
Yeah.
And therefore, they should be under presidential control. As Stephen Miller pointed out, the president in the constitutional scheme is the only official elected by the entire country to represent the supposed will of the people. And now, of course, we see how so-called democracy always agitates against the will of the people. Well,
Yes.
Trump is trying to turn that around by saying, listen, I was elected by the will of the people. All of these independent agencies have no right to be independent agencies.
Mm.
Because if they are independent agencies subject to no one's control, then we have four branches of government. So he issues this executive order saying all of the independent agencies, the EPA, the Consumer Protection Board, all of the alphabet agencies are under my control, which they always were. And he's setting that up for ultimate Supreme Court review. The Supreme Court's going to have to decide nothing less than the continued existence of the administrative state
Yes.
as an independent branch of government.
I mean, it's interesting. That term has always bothered me, and I've said to people like, independent of whom? And
Right.
really, the answer is everybody. They're
Yeah.
literally a dictator unto themselves that reports to no one, and it's amazing. But how did they sell this to us? This was, liberalism, progressivism era, essentially. Max Weber, basically presenting this idea that we should be governed by technocrats. That
Well, here's how it
I
worked.
mean, that's what they want. Like we want people who are technocrats, who are experts, and they
Yeah.
they know better, and they should tell us what to do. And that's sort of what they've sold. That's sort of better than any other system of government. It's really like Plato's, guardians that get to rule everything.
Yeah, well, the way it kept limping along and functioned as it did is that successive administrations were more or less able to put their own people in.
Yep.
And so the independent agencies de facto were really not independent. But now we're finding that those who occupy seats of authority, so-called, in these independent agencies don't want to be replaced and won't let
Right.
themselves be replaced,
Right.
as was the custom before. And this is all a matter of custom, by the way. It's a custom that developed outside of the law, outside of the constitutional
Yep.
framework, and it was tolerated. Just the way, by the way, just Judge Cannon noted when she said, "Oh, just a minute, the special counsel was never validly appointed. It was just this custom." After the expiration of the Special Counsel Act in the 1990s, this custom arose of just willy-nilly appointing special counsels to go after people with unlimited funding,
Yep.
accountable to nobody. And she said, "Oh, well, now that I've noticed that this custom has no basis in the law, I decide that this whole prosecution is void ab initio," and she closed the case. And that decision is going to stand because the current Justice Department abandoned the appeal to the 11th Circuit. So we have a custom that developed, and that's all it is. And if the Supreme Court does the right thing, it will issue some sort of landmark decision saying that these so-called independent agencies are subject to presidential authority. They have to be. Otherwise, we no longer have a republic. We no longer have a democracy, as Stephen Miller pointed out. We have a bureaucracy.
Mm. I mean, it's essentially, where the Roman Empire went when the military and the bureaucracy picked the emperor, controlled the emperor, for a while and did what they chose. I mean, that's sort of what they want to turn it into. And it's interesting in their rhetoric, the Democrats, this was Biden a lot. If you listen to it, when they quote defended democracy, they didn't actually defend the principle of republicanism that people who are entrusted with the public trust answer to the people at an election. They always said we're defending the democratic institutions. It was
Right.
just it was really an interesting shift, by which they mean the mainstream media, the bureaucracies, the independent agencies, that to them this was democracy. The actual things that are not democracy at all, or even republicanism, they're unelected dictators, essentially. And that's really what they
Yeah,
defended by this.
exactly. And let's give the framers of the Constitution credit where credit is due. I
Mhm.
mean, I'm not a fan of a constitution that makes no reference to God. The founding documents of other
Yeah.
nations throughout history always made reference to the Creator, to God. the Irish Constitution, the Mexican Constitution before the Mexican Revolution, and so forth. But nevertheless, the framework they erected within the context of a poly-professional Protestant country served as well as could be expected in given circumstances. For example, thank God for the Electoral College.
Yes.
Although Trump won the popular vote, if he hadn't, and this was a popular vote-based election, we'd have that moron as president, that cackling buffoon. So we're fortunate that the framework, to the extent that it isn't bent out of shape, does give us some level of protection.
Yes.
And by the way, this is something we should mention, which is a unique marriage of the problems in church and state. The USCCB, perfect toady of the regime, brought an action because the spigot of funding for its facilitation of human trafficking in the form of illegal immigrants was cut off by Trump. And they went before a Trump judge in the D.C. circuit. I didn't know there was one.
Exactly. I was surprised at that.
And he denied a temporary restraining order.
Yep.
And so this is a perfect example of the marriage of church and state. Kenneth Craycraft, by the way, I always mention his book, The Myth of Religious Freedom. He says that what we have in the United States is actually the most perfect marriage of church and state ever seen, in the sense that the church is totally subjugated to state power and now depends upon state power for financial subsidies, in this case in particular, so that it can continue to make huge amounts of money from human trafficking, including all the salaries of the officials in the church involved in this human trafficking of illegal immigrants. So here we see, again, the intersection of problems in the church with a problem in the state.
Now,